She had not cried when he said it. That was the part nobody understood. They kept waiting for her to fall apart, waiting the way you wait for a kettle to scream, with that specific impatience of people who need the scene to end so they can comfort someone and feel useful. But Sergeant Mara Voss did not give them the scene. She had been sitting in the Link Bay break room with a cup of cold coffee when she heard Deacon's voice carry through the corridor, easy and low, confessing to his bunkmate Rels everything he had never said to her face, that she was not what he had wanted, that she was convenient, that he had always meant to end it, but the deployment kept getting extended, and it seemed cruel to do it while they were both out here in the dark. And besides, here his voice dropped to that intimate hush men use only for other men. She had been useful, steady. She kept things from getting complicated. Mara had listened to the whole thing. Her coffee had gone cold by the third sentence. She did not stand up when it was over. She did not go down that corridor. She finished the coffee cold, rinsed her cup, set it upside down on the rack with the same care she always gave it, and went to her bunk to sleep 4 hours before her next link shift. That was 11 days ago. She had not thought about it since. Or she had thought about it the way you think about a small stone in your boot, present, acknowledged, filed. She had other things to do. She always had other things to do. Outpost Care 7 was not a place that allowed you to live inside your own head for long. It sat at the edge of what the mission briefings called the threshold zone, which was the kind of name that made something sound deliberate and chosen, when in fact it only meant that command did not know what was on the other side, and had decided that someone should go find out. That someone had turned out to be 63 soldiers, 12 technicians, a medical officer named Dr. Cho, who was technically on rotation from a university program, and had not signed up for this specifically, and a link bay full of remote chassis. The machines that walked so the humans inside them did not have to. The Vorith were what was on the other side of the threshold. Nobody had managed a good look at one. The briefings were full of sensor data and distance imagery, and the word significant used in enough different contexts that it had stopped meaning anything. What the soldiers at Care 7 knew from direct experience was this. The Vorith attacked in swarms. They moved in patterns that looked almost logical until they didn't. And if you were linked when they breached your chassis' signal integrity, something came back through the connection. Something that was not data. Something that the medical team logged in their reports as neurological contamination, and that the soldiers called by shorter names, none of them polite. 2 people had lost a link to contamination since the outpost went active. Corporal Steen, who had screamed for 4 minutes before the emergency disconnect caught him, and Private Yule, who had not screamed at all, which was somehow worse. Yule was in the medical bay. He had not spoken in 9 days. Dr. Cho sat with him in the evenings and played recordings of birdsong, because Yule had mentioned once, early in the deployment, that he had grown up near a place where there were a lot of birds. Mara did not let herself think too hard about Yule. She strapped into her link harness at 600, same as every shift. The harness was a full-body rig, custom-fitted. The foam padding at the collar had started to compress in a particular way that matched the shape of her neck exactly, and she noticed that the way you notice something you love, quietly, without calling attention to it. Sergeant Ove was in the adjacent bay, already running diagnostics on his chassis. She could hear him through the dividing wall, muttering the checklist under his breath the way he always did, like a prayer. Private Delco was late, which meant Warrant Officer Tanaka would appear in approximately 4 minutes to make Delco regret it. Mara had been here long enough to know the rhythms. She closed her eyes. The link did not feel like anything exactly. People described it wrong when they described it. They talked about entering the machine, or becoming the machine, and both of those were too clean. What it felt like was more like pressing your face into cold water and opening your eyes. A sudden expansion, a recalibration, the world going from something you saw through eyes to something you inhabited through sensors and servos, and a pressure sensitivity that was not quite touch but was related to it. Her chassis was 3 kilometers out in the dark, at the edge of the sensor perimeter, and then she was there with it, standing in red rock dust with a sky the color of a bruise and the distant chittering of Vorath activity somewhere in the northeast quadrant. The chassis had a name. She had named it herself against regs, because the regs on naming equipment existed for administrative reasons and had not accounted for the fact that you might spend 8 hours a day inhabiting something and develop feelings about it. She had called it Steady, which was not a name she had taken from anywhere. It was just the word that felt right. She walked steady into the patrol sweep. The northeast quadrant was quiet except for the chittering, which was always there now, a kind of ambient noise that the veteran linkers had learned to hear as background, and the newer ones still flinched at. Mara swept east, checking the sensor markers, logging the rock formations that changed between shifts. The Vorath moved things, rearranged the landscape in ways that seemed purposeless and were probably not. Command had a whole analysis team looking at the patterns. The analysis team's latest report had concluded that the rearrangement might be territorial behavior, or communication, or aesthetic, and that further observation was recommended. Mara had read that report. She had thought, I could have told you that for free. She was at marker 7 when the chittering changed pitch. Not louder, changed. It was the same volume and the same frequency range, but something in the quality of it shifted, the way a silence shifts when it becomes intentional rather than empty. Mara stopped steady and ran a passive scan. The northeast was still clear on thermals. The rock formations were the same as the last pass. Nothing had moved. But the sound was wrong. She keyed her comm. Voss, Link Bay 3 at marker 7. Northeast chitter is behaving anomalous, requesting confirmation from Ove's sweep position. Ove's voice came back immediately, the slight flatness of link-translated speech still not masking his particular way of landing on consonants. Bay 2, confirming, I've had the same thing since marker 4. Tanaka flagged it as a known variant 8 minutes ago. Known variant. That was the phrase they used for behavior they had logged before but did not understand. Mara did not find it reassuring. She moved steady forward, slow and careful, keeping to the long shadow of a rock formation that stood about 12 meters high and looked like nothing so much as a tooth. The signal hit without warning. It did not come from outside. That was the thing she remembered most clearly afterward. The entry point of the contamination was not the chassis' external sensors, not any of the input systems. It came from inside the link architecture itself, from somewhere in the signal pathway between Steady and the harness back in the bay. As if something had been waiting in the connection. As if something had been traveling along it slowly for days and had finally arrived. It did not feel like data. It felt like a voice that was not sound, a language that existed in some register below language, something her nervous system could receive but her mind could not parse. It went through her the way electricity goes through water, instantly, completely, without asking. And in the split second before she hit her emergency disconnect, she understood something that she would spend the next 3 days trying to put into words. The Vorath were not attacking the chassis. They were attacking the connection. They were attacking the part that was her. She was back in the harness bay before she had fully processed the disconnect. The bay lights were the yellow of a mild emergency. Someone was talking. Her hands were shaking, which she noted clinically, and she put them flat on her thighs and breathed until they stopped. Tanaka was in the doorway. He had the expression he wore when things were bad but not catastrophic, which was a specific tension in the jaw that Mara had catalogued early in the deployment. Voss, report. Contamination attempt marker 7, northeast quadrant. Her voice was steady. She was proud of her voice. I disconnected inside the 2-second window. Clean break. Tanaka crossed the bay in 4 steps and pulled up her neural readout on the wall monitor. She watched his eyes move across it. She did not look at the readout herself. Clean break, he confirmed, and she let out the breath she had been holding in the place underneath breathing. You're the third this shift. Ove caught one at marker 4, Delco at the perimeter fence. Delco got hit. Disconnected in time, he's fine. A pause. They're adapting, Voss. She said nothing. She was looking at the harness where it hung from the ceiling mount, the custom fit of the collar, the worn patches at the wrists where she had rubbed against it on every shift for 4 months. Steady was still out there, disconnected and standing in the red dust with no one home, running on autonomous standby protocols, waiting for her to come back. She thought about the signal, about the thing that had moved through the connection like it belonged there, about the way it had known where she was, not where the chassis was, but where she was, inside the link. As if it had been looking for her specifically. Tanaka, she said, I need to see the full contamination logs, Steen's, Yule's, and every near miss since we went active. He looked at her for a moment. He was not a man who asked why when someone gave him a look that meant they had a reason. I'll have them cleared for you by 1400. And I need the signal architecture schematics, the full ones, not the operational overview. Those are above your clearance. Then get me a clearance. He held her look for 3 seconds, then he nodded and left. She sat in the empty bay with the yellow lights and the sound of the ventilation system, and thought about the stone in her boot. She thought about Deacon down in the East Wing, running his own link shifts, sleeping in his own bunk, telling Rel's things in corridors he thought were empty. She thought about the way she had not cried. She wondered briefly if that was a bad sign, if something in her had shut off. Then she thought about Yule in the medical bay with the birdsong playing, and decided the question was not useful, and filed it. The contamination logs ran to 412 pages. Mara read them in the break room over the course of 6 hours, with coffee that she remembered to drink while it was still warm. Dr. Cho found her at the halfway point and sat across from her without being invited, which was something Mara had observed about doctors. They did it like it was a professional skill. You were nearly hit, Cho said. Nearly. How are you feeling? Mara considered the question. It was a real question, not a procedural one, and it deserved a real answer. Like I touched a live wire and someone shut the power off in time. The wire is still there. Cho nodded. She had a way of absorbing information without reacting to it that Mara had come to find more comforting than sympathy. What happened in the 2 seconds before you disconnected? I need to think about how to describe it. Take your time. It was directional, it knew where to look. She stopped. The words were wrong. All the words she had were wrong. Not the chassis me. It knew the difference. It knew there was a difference. Cho was quiet for a moment. That's consistent with what Steen said in the first few minutes after his contamination, before the symptoms made him stop being able to give a coherent account. She paused. Before Yule stopped speaking altogether. What did Steen say exactly? Cho looked at the table. He said it learned him. That was the phrase he used. He said it learned him through the link and he could feel it knowing things. And then he said that when it knew enough, it stopped being separate. Mara sat with that. The link architecture, she said. It was designed to carry human neural signal to the chassis and back. Bidirectional because the chassis needs haptic feedback, sensory data, situational processing. You can't fully remote pilot something that complex with one-way transmission. She was thinking aloud. She knew she was thinking aloud. Cho did not try to stop her. So the connection is open, both ways, and the Vorath found the open connection. Yes. And they're sending something through it. Yes. And what they're sending isn't random. It's targeted. It's learning. It's using the connection to study the person on the other end. Cho said, that's my current working hypothesis. Yes. Mara looked at the log files in front of her. 412 pages. 63 contamination events ranging from the minor, a momentary static, a headache, a few lost seconds to Steen to Yule. a range, a spectrum. They're getting better at it, she said. Every attempt, yes. The contamination signatures are becoming more refined, less like flooding the signal with noise and more like learning to speak the language. Cho looked at her steadily. Yes. Mara turned back to the logs. She read for another hour. At the end she had 3 pages of notes and a thing forming in her mind that was not yet a plan, but was the shape that a plan would eventually take. She did not know if it was a good thing or a terrible thing. She suspected it was both, the way important things usually were. She went to find Tanaka. He was in the command bay, running shift reports. He looked up when she came in and did something with his expression that was almost a frown, not quite. You look like someone who's about to tell me something I'm not going to like. Probably, she agreed. I've been reading the contamination logs. I assumed. The Vorath are learning how we link. They're learning the signal architecture. Every contamination attempt is them refining their understanding of the connection, learning how to move through it, how to find the person on the other end, how to speak to the nervous system in a language the brain can actually receive. She stopped. They're not trying to hurt us, or not primarily. They're trying to understand us. And they're using the link to do it because the link is the only place we've given them access. Tanaka was quiet for a moment, and the damage to Steen and Yule. Collateral or earlier attempts. Before they learned to be subtle. She looked at the command bay screens, the schematic of the outpost, the perimeter markers, the northeast quadrant where the chitter had changed pitch. They can feel us through the link. They can feel the shape of a human mind. And I think it's the scale of it that's causing the damage. A Vorath mind and a human mind are too different. The contact is too much voltage, and the humans on the receiving end are getting blown out. Which is still damage, Voss, regardless of intent. I know, but Tanaka. She turned to look at him. If they're learning the language, if they're refining the contact, that means at some point they'll know how to do it without blowing the receiver. At some point they'll have learned us well enough to talk to us. And if that happens when we're not ready. She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Tanaka sat back. He had the jaw tension but deeper now behind his eyes. What are you suggesting? I want to go back into link. Controlled environment. Full monitoring. I want to wait for a contact attempt and instead of disconnecting, I want to lean into it. See if I can push something back. The silence in the command bay was the particular silence of a bad idea that might also be the only idea. That's a significant risk, Tanaka said finally. Steen and Yule were surprised. I won't be. She heard how thin that sounded. She did not take it back. I have the contamination signatures memorized. I know what the approach feels like in the first 2 seconds. And I read something in the logs on the 3rd near-miss event. Corporal Erickson reported that the contact felt like a door opening in both directions. She didn't push back because the disconnect protocol kicked in automatically before she thought to try. But she felt the bidirectionality. Tanaka looked at her for a long time. He was reading her the way he read situation reports, carefully and without sentiment. Why you? He said. It was not a question, but she answered it anyway. Because I was nearly hit today and I'm not scared yet. And because, she stopped. There was something true here that she was not sure she wanted to say in a command bay. Then she said it anyway. Because I know how to leave something in myself that doesn't get touched. I know how to be present and also somewhere else. Behind a door, she paused. I'm good at that. Tanaka held her look for another 3 seconds. 24-hour prep, full medical clearance from Cho. I want a manual disconnect on a half-second trigger, not the 2-second standard, half a second, and I hold the button myself. You push one word through the comm at any point and I disconnect you immediately. One word and you're out, no questions, no consequences. Understood. And I want a proposal on paper by 800 tomorrow. Not just what you're going to do, what you're hoping to learn. Because if this goes wrong, Voss, I need to be able to explain to command why I authorized it." She nodded. "Go sleep," he said. "Actual sleep, not lying in your bunk planning. Go eat something first, and then sleep." She almost smiled at that. She went. She passed Deacon in the corridor outside the mess hall. He did not look at her differently than he looked at anything else, which she had noticed about him early and liked and now understood differently. He had that face, the face of a man who had decided the shape of things and saw them accordingly. She was a certain shape to him, and he was consistent about seeing it. She nodded and kept walking. She felt nothing that required attention. She ate, she slept. She dreamed about the link, which was not unusual. Most of the veteran linkers dreamed in Steady's visual register, the bruise-colored sky, the red dust, the tooth-shaped rock, but this dream had something else in it, a sound at the edge. A voice that was not a voice. She woke at 400 and lay still for a moment, feeling the shape of the thing in the dream, and then she got up and went to write her proposal. At 600 she was in the link bay. Cho was there with her monitoring equipment, and Tanaka was at the manual disconnect console, and Ove was in the adjacent bay running a parallel sweep, because they needed the northeast quadrant active and she could not be in two chassis at once. She had said goodbye to Steady in a way that was not saying goodbye, just touching the maintenance panel on the chassis' left shoulder before they wheeled it out, a small habit. She climbed into the harness and felt the familiar press of the collar, the exact shape of her own neck impressed into the foam. "Voss," Tanaka said. "Com word is anchor." "Anchor. Go when ready." She closed her eyes. Steady was at marker 7. She had asked for that. She walked the chassis to the flat space between the tooth rock and the perimeter, the place where she had been standing when the signal came through the day before. The bruise-colored sky, the red dust moving in a wind that Steady felt as pressure differential but she perceived as cold. The chitter in the northeast, which was already at the anomalous pitch. She had thought about what to do during the approach. She had thought about it for 24 hours, and she had come to the conclusion that the only honest thing was to not do anything specific, to be present. To be there in the connection without armor, which was the opposite of everything they had been trained to do in a contamination approach. The training said, protect the self, close down, minimize the signal the other side can read. That made sense if the contact was an attack, but if it was, the word was wrong, all the words were wrong. If it was conversation, then closing down was the wrong thing. Closing down in a conversation meant you only received and never gave back, and the voltage stayed unbalanced, and the receiver got fried. She waited. The signal came after 8 minutes. She felt it the same way she had felt it the day before, not from outside, from within the connection, something moving along the pathway with a purpose. She held still. She did not disconnect. She breathed slowly in the harness, and she felt the thing in the connection the way you feel something in the dark that you cannot see but know is there, by the displacement, by the change in the quality of the air. It found her. The contact was. She did not have words for this for 3 days, and when she finally tried to describe it for the debrief report, she deleted her first 6 attempts. What she eventually wrote was, it was like being seen in the dark by something that did not have eyes. Like having the shape of you become visible all at once, not what you look like but what you are made of. Like someone putting their hand flat against a door you are leaning against, and feeling the warmth of it, and understanding from that warmth that there is something on the other side that is alive. She pushed back. Not thought, not words, not any human communication system. She pushed back the same way it was reaching her, on the level below language, in the register of the nervous system, the direct signal. She pushed back, I am here. I know you're there. I am not closing the door. The contact changed. She felt it change the way you feel a tide turn, not suddenly, not with drama, but with an unmistakable shift in the quality of the pressure. The approach had been searching, probing, mapping her the way something maps a new surface, point by point. When she pushed back, it paused. It withdrew slightly. And then it came back differently. Not probing. Something else. She did not have a word for it. She had the feeling of it, the feeling of something that had been moving with great force and had encountered, unexpectedly, a response and was adjusting. She held the door open. In the harness, she was breathing fast and shallow, and she did not notice. Dr. Cho noticed and noted it in the monitoring log. Tanaka's hand was on the manual disconnect. None of that was in the link. In the link, she was at marker 7 with the red dust and the bruised sky, and something on the other side of the connection that was very large and very old, and she understood with a clarity she would never quite be able to source, surprised. It had not expected her to push back. It had learned humans for months through the link, through every contamination attempt, through Steen's 4 minutes of screaming and Yule's 9 days of silence, and in all of that learning it had not encountered a human who stayed. She stayed. What happened next took 47 seconds according to the monitoring logs. It felt longer. She could not have said what occurred exactly. The contact was not information transfer in any form she could describe, not imagery, not language, not data. It was more like two things touching and both of them changing slightly from the contact, the way two liquids mixed at the edge. She felt something, and she did not know if the something was the Vorith side or her own mind, reacting to the pressure or both. What she felt was vast, old, not malicious. That was the word she kept coming back to in the debrief, not malicious, and she knew how inadequate it was. She knew how dangerous it was to assign motive to something so unlike herself. But she had been inside the contact, and she had felt it directly with the part of herself that was below language, and that part did not lie, not malicious, not human, not interested in her comfort or her survival, but not oriented toward her harm. Oriented toward something else, something large enough that she was peripheral to it, and the contact had been incidental. No, investigatory. Like a very large thing that had noticed something small and strange and reached out to see what it was. She thought so did I. At 47 seconds the signal shifted again, and this time she felt the withdrawal as something the contact was choosing, not retreating, not defeated, but done with this, for now, satisfied with something. She felt it pull back through the connection the way you pull back a hand deliberately, and then it was gone. She sat in the link for 2 more minutes. The chitter in the northeast had gone quiet. She calmed, "I'm coming back." She walked steady back toward the perimeter. She disconnected at the bay. She sat in the harness with her eyes open, looking at the yellow-lit ceiling, while Cho ran the post-link neural check and Tanaka stood by the disconnect console with his hand still on the button. "Report," he said. "Two-way contact, full duration." I initiated response at approximately second 3 and maintained through second 47. She stopped. "I don't know what I told them. I don't know what they learned." She paused again. "I know they weren't expecting anyone to answer." Cho looked up from the monitoring display. "Neural profile is clean. No contamination signatures." She said it with the flatness of someone who is trying not to show surprise and is not quite managing. "Clean," Tanaka said. "Same contact signature as the previous attempts. Identical origin, completely different behavior, completely different." She looked at her hands. They were not shaking. "They're learning how to talk to us, and I think I just told them that we're willing to listen." There was a long silence in the link bay. Ove's voice came through the wall. "For what it's worth, the chitter's been down since your link went to 40 seconds. All of it. The whole northeast." They sat with that for a moment. Mara unstrapped from the harness. She stood up. Her legs were fine. Everything about her was fine. She had this feeling she had felt twice before in her life. Once as a child at the edge of a lake just before she jumped in. Once at the beginning of a relationship that had turned out to be real, actually real, not just the performance of one, the feeling of having done something that could not be undone. The feeling of having stepped out of one version of things into another. The version she had stepped out of, was the one where the Vorith were an enemy to be repelled, and the link was a tool, and the only variables were how long the outpost could hold, and how many people ended up like Yule. She did not know what version she had stepped into. She knew it was different. She said, "I need to write this up, and then I need to go back in tomorrow." Tanaka looked at her for a moment, then he nodded. In the corridor outside the link bay, she passed Deacon going the other direction. He glanced at her, and his face did the thing it always did, smooth and settled and assured of the shape of things. She thought about the contact, the feeling of being seen in the dark by something that did not have eyes. She thought about the thing she had pushed back through the connection below language. "I am here. I know you're there. I am not closing the door." She thought, "That is the first time I have said that and meant it, fully meant it, without keeping something behind the door so no one could get to it." She did not say any of this to Deacon. She said nothing to Deacon. She kept walking. The second contact happened 22 hours later. The third happened 6 hours after that. Each time the signal was cleaner, not louder, not larger, but more precisely shaped, the way a sculptor refines a form. Each time Mara pushed back, and each time the contact lasted longer before the withdrawal. By the fourth contact, something else was happening. She did not fully understand it until after, in the debrief, when she was trying to describe it and landed on this. It was as if the Vorith had learned to knock instead of entering. The approach changed from something moving through the connection to something positioned at the threshold of the connection, waiting, asking permission with its presence. She opened the door. On the sixth contact, something came through that was she had no word for this either, and she used image in the report knowing it was wrong. A shape, a vastness rendered in a form her mind could approximate without catching fire from it. Something like, "We have been here long." Something like, "We have seen things move through this place before." Something like, "You are different, different from what came before, different from what we thought would come." She pushed back. "I know we are young, we are very young." Something like acknowledgement. Something like, she used the word concern in the report and underlined that it was approximate concern, or wait, or the feeling of something very old considering something very young and finding the youth significant. Not threatening, significant. She wrote in her report, in the section marked interpretive notes, which I acknowledge may be wholly wrong. "I believe the Vorith have been a species for so long that they have not encountered anything recently young. I believe the link is the first contact they have had with a consciousness so new that they do not know its shape. I believe the contamination events were not attacks. I believe they were the equivalent of someone speaking normally to someone who cannot hear. The volume of the contact was calibrated for a receiver they expected to find and found us instead, smaller and newer, and we were damaged not by malice but by magnitude. I also believe that they know this now. I believe the shift in their contact behavior represents accommodation, adjustment for us, not softness, not care in any sense I can claim to understand, but adjustment. I believe we are having a conversation. I do not know what we are saying. I believe we should keep saying it." Tanaka forwarded the report to command with a cover note that read, "I have no better explanation for the cessation of Vorith incursion activity over the past 72 hours. I recommend continuing the contact protocol as described. The Vorith did not breach the perimeter again. They did not retreat entirely. They were still in the northeast quadrant. The chitter was still there, ambient and present, but it had changed character, not the anomalous pitch, not the hunting frequency. Something steadier. Something that the veteran linkers who had been in this dark long enough to hear it properly described to each other at shift change in the shorthand of people who do not entirely trust their own interpretations as waiting, like something waiting to see what you do next. What they did next was keep going. That was the human thing, the stubbornly, embarrassingly human thing. They kept going. Ove ran his sweeps. Delco stopped being late. Dr. Cho played birdsong for Yule, And on the 11th day after the first contact, Yule said the word outside, looking at the small porthole window, and Cho cried quietly in the corridor after where no one would see. Mara went into Link every day. The contacts continued. She pushed back. Every time I am here, I know you're there, I am not closing the door, and every time the thing on the other side adjusted, refined, came a little closer to something that might, in another year or another decade, turn into a language both sides could claim. On the 14th day, Sergeant Ove knocked on the frame of the break room door. Mara was drinking coffee that was still warm, which she had been making a point of lately, drinking it while it was warm. "Can I ask you something?" Ove said. "Sit down." He sat. He had been in the link bay for both of the first two contacts, running the parallel sweep, and he had not asked her anything in 2 weeks, which she had registered as a form of respect. She waited. "How do you stay?" he said. "When the contact comes, how do you hold still and let it, how do you not disconnect?" She thought about it. It was a real question, and she tried to give it a real answer. "I know how to leave part of myself alone," she said. "I know how to keep something back, and I used to think that was useful, protective." She looked at the cup. "But the contact doesn't work unless you're actually there, all the way, and I found out that I could do that. I didn't know I could before." Ove was quiet for a moment. "What changed?" She thought about that too. She thought about the break room 11 days before her first contact attempt, and the cold coffee, and the careful way she had rinsed and placed the cup, and the long practice of not letting the things that hurt you become anything loud enough to need managing. "I stopped keeping the door closed," she said, "and I found out that the things I was keeping inside it were smaller than I thought, when I finally looked." Ove nodded slowly. He did not ask anything else. She finished her coffee. She had a link shift in an hour. She would go to marker 7 and she would wait, and the signal would come and she would push back. "I am here. I know you're there. I am not closing the door." And something vast and old and very far from human would pause at the threshold of the connection, and knock and wait, and she would open it again. This was not the war they had been sent here to fight. It was not glorious in the way that things in mission briefings were glorious. It was slow, and it was uncertain, and it happened in the dark, in a link bay, in a harness with a worn collar that fit her neck exactly, in 47-second increments that might be nothing or might be the first words of the longest conversation in human history. She put her cup on the rack, upside down with care. She went.